Well, I love what your dad created way back when. I've been getting emails for years. And so, yeah, he was a front runner in, getting Christians and movies and faith and film all, working together, or at least making it a conversation before anybody else was.
Yeah, he was really a visionary on that, and it was we growing up in that home, it was just such a cool, unique thing to see. I mean, your kid's probably the same, but just someone following what God called them to do. And so there were plenty of times where it was pretty hard, but yeah, as it always is. But you never want to pull a Jonah. So he did it. He did it, and it's been incredible. It's incredible to kind of see some of that work come to fruition after a long time. He started in 1978, so it's a long time. He was
Oh wow, I don't go back that far, but wow, I didn't know it went
plugging
that
away
far
on
back,
it.
but
So, well, we're just going to kind of roll into it. Why don't you tell me a little bit about your story? Why don't you start out kind of telling us your story?
Yeah, sure. I mean, my story as far as my career goes, I guess I'll keep it to mostly that, which is, I grew up in California. I have a twin brother. I'm going to bring it up at the beginning here because I always, sometimes when I talk about my past, I start saying we. And we both were into drawing, and we loved comic strips and animation and you name it. And that evolved into us finding out about California Institute of the Arts just after we came out of high school. And so it's called Cal Arts. It's one of the very first schools in the U.S. that taught animation. And so we were able to go there back in '88, and only for a year and a half, because then Disney came calling. We were running out of money. We couldn't afford to stay there. And it was a real God moment where we were praying and going, how are we gonna? So we only wait for a year and a half. And, because we had no idea how we would come back after like Christmas break. And fortunately, that was right when Disney came and looked at portfolios. And Tony and I both got into this Disney internship back in '88. So we were in training at Disney for about 9 weeks during The Little Mermaid. That was the film they were making at the time. It was really cool to see it all from behind the scenes and seeing early screenings of it. But we didn't get to touch it at all because we were interns. And so we did pass that internship, and it was for the new Florida Disney Animation Studio. And so I don't know if you guys remember at Disney MGM, and now it's called Hollywood Studios, but at that theme park, they were going to have a working studio that you could tour. And so Tony and I were there opening day, May of 1989. Yeah, so that's kind of how it all started, how I got into Disney. And honestly, we were still, both of us only just turned 22 when we first started at Disney. And then from there, worked on Roller Coaster Rabbit, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, Lion King, Pocahontas. I'm trying to do them in order. Tarzan, a little bit of Atlantis, and then Pocahontas, and then Mulan. And for Mulan, I was a supervising animator. I got to design Mushu the dragon.
Wow.
Oh, cool.
Do you so Mulan was kind of your last experience at Disney before you went out on your own? Is that
Yes and no. So I did, there's a whole story to it, but I left Disney kind of at the height of my career. I just finished Mulan. I had done a little short film, John Henry. And then if you've ever taken the tour about animation, they've gotten rid of it, but it used to be for about 10 or 12 years, you could take a tour and it would, it was Mushu showing you how animation is done. And I was in that as a, they filmed me for it, but also I animated Mushu in that too. That was my very last job I did at Disney. Then I left to go work at Big Idea Productions on VeggieTales. And that was for faith reasons. I really felt like I was I'd climbed the rung, and I had kind of worn myself out trying to get to the top at Disney, and realized there was just more work. It wasn't fulfilling. I still loved animation. I still love drawing to this day, but I could see that I wanted to do more more and more directly with my faith. And so VeggieTales, I just found out about them over the last couple of years before that. So I joined them just before they did their first feature film, Jonah. So I came in and helped with that. And then I created the Larry Boy 2D animated series, about five episodes of that. Um, yeah, and then they went bankrupt. And so I came back to Disney. So this is the answer to that question.
Oh, wow.
Brother Bear was my last film because I'd come back and I worked on that for about the last, whatever, 6 to 8 months to help finish that film up. And then I went independent and I started my own little company here in Franklin, Tennessee. I moved away from Orlando.
Gotcha. Wow. So was the majority of your career in Florida then?
Yes, majority of my Disney career was there. Yeah, for about 12 years.
Wow. Amazing. Do they still do animating out of Florida anymore, or did they stop that process? Or?
No, right after I came back to do Brother Bear, the writing was kind of on the wall. We didn't really know it, but we could kind of see signs that change was coming. Computer animation was just starting to become a thing. And we just assumed, between Disney and Pixar, they weren't the same company back then. They were two separate companies, but we thought, well, Pixar, but they had an agreement. Distribution was through Disney. And so we were just like, well, one doesn't have to replace the other. We just assumed, okay, there's going to be computer animation now, and there's going to be 2D animation like there always was. Well, no, we became dinosaurs very quickly, and they just did away with 2D animation completely at Disney. They never quite admitted it because they always had about 5 to 10 people that could still do 2D, and they would keep them doing like little shorts for the parks or whatever. And so therefore they could say, oh no, we still do 2D. But they'd basically laid off hundreds of people right after it was a Winnie the Pooh film. That was the actual last one. And then Princess and the Frog, both of those were the last two films. So I had already left Disney, and that happened within the next 6 months or so after I left that they shut it all down.
Wow. So tell us, was your family from California, or did you kind of tell us a little bit about that? Like, did you get to go back, or did your brother stay in California? Did he go with you to Florida? What happened?
A little bit of both. So we both went through that internship in California, and we were Californians. We grew up there in Long Beach, California. But then when we both got the job, passing the internship, we both went out to Florida to help open the studio. But within a year, Tony said he'd gotten engaged to his old girlfriend who was still back in California. Meanwhile, I had gotten married and brought my wife with me. And so he wanted to go back. And so a year after, being in Florida, he went back to the California studio and started his career. And then we were separated by 3,000 miles, but still working on the same movies for the next, 10 or more years. Because oftentimes the Florida studio was helping the California studio. We were much smaller in Florida. And so we would do sections of the movie, like Lion King. I was doing Young Simba, but Tony was in California doing Pumbaa. Yeah. And so it was a lot of fun that way. And a lot of people don't know that, but that both studios were kind of going full steam back in those days.
Wow, that's such a cool. I feel like that is so unique to get to work with your brother, your twin brother. And did he stay with Disney when you kind of went independent, or did you guys go independent together?
It was funny because we would never talk about it. It's weird that I'm thinking about it now, but we never went, hey, I think I'm going to do this until we'd pretty much decided. And so I did know that Tony left Disney before I did. But it was so crazy how similar the reasons were. And I really just think it was God working on both of our hearts separately. And then for whatever reason, we just weren't sharing about it. But we were separated by 3,000 miles. But we would talk a lot on the phone, and it kind of led to a podcast later on in life. But anyway, during that time, one day he called me, and he had finished Mulan. He was one of the directors of Mulan when I was the supervising animator. And so after Mulan, he'd moved back to Florida to help do Milan. And then after a year and a half, he went back with the film to do post production in California, and then he stayed there, right? Because they were going to give him another movie or something, and that didn't really work out. And he ended up working on Emperor's New Groove and doing Kronk. And
That's amazing. Yeah. Wow.
if I was him, I would do the voice for you. He loves doing the voice.
Yeah.
Everybody's got a Patrick Warburton in them, it seems like. Um, and so anyway, but I stayed in the Florida studio, and I worked on, like I said, Tarzan, and he did it. So there were a few films we worked on separately, you could say, because he was on one, and because there was always two movies going on at the same time, and so sometimes I would be on one, he'd be on the other one. And so anyway, when he went back, he after a couple of years of basically feeling like the same feelings I ended up feeling, which was not liking, and this is back in, we're talking about 2000. This is, it's going to sound very similar to what's going on right now, but it started back then, which was not really agreeing with everything that Disney was doing, starting to see that it was going to get even worse. And so Tony broke off and started his own company in California, Tenacious Family Entertainment, and did Lenny and Sid video series, which was like, Christian. It was supposed to be the next VeggieTales, right? But it was like it was a bunny and a mouse characters.
Wow.
And I'm shouting that out in case anybody remembers Lenny and Sid. But they did a couple videos of that. And then meanwhile, I felt the calling to go to Big Idea. And so we ended up being kind of, rivals, I guess you could say, friendly rivals. And then I was working for VeggieTales and Tony was trying to create the next VeggieTales. And so we had a friendly arrangement. And Tony would call me all the time. Hey, can you come? I had moved to Chicago to be a part of the original VeggieTales team. And he's like, hey, why don't you move here, work for me? And I would get those phone calls all the time. And I'd be like, well, no, I'm doing VeggieTales. And, yeah, I think it's great what you're doing over there. But, I don't know what's going to happen. And I already did a big move. I left Disney. I left my dream job. I'm over here now. I'm kind of passionate about it, So we both had those same feelings of like, how can we use our abilities for God more directly?
Wow. What a cool, I feel like that's such a cool mirroring over time, and that's a unique story in itself, for you guys to be twins and to be brothers and to be able to work in a similar field and to both love God and kind of do this together but apart, I think that's so cool.
It is weird. That's why it's really neat, just to fast forward a little bit, that we got to work again and really for the first time directly together, on a feature film, which is Light of the World, which is just coming out now.
Oh, wow. So he worked with you on this most recent film.
Yeah. So I'm one of the two directors of the film. And just like Tony was my boss on Mulan, and he loves to bring it up, I'm going to bring up that I was able to hire him, and I was his boss on Light of the World, which is that he was the animation director and co-head of story. And so we brought him in to help us make Light of the World.
Wow. So the thing is that you've had such a unique experience because you worked for basically like the gold standard in animation, right? Disney for a long time during the crucial kind of age of Disney animation. You worked for VeggieTales, which I'm sure most people are going to remember and know about, especially since this is a family podcast about dads and raising kids and stuff. So I'm sure many of them are probably even re-showing that now. And then you kind of started off on doing your own independent thing, and you're about to launch this new film. Can you tell us a little bit about it, so for the people listening, about the film, what the inspiration was, and how you kind of got added through to the project?
Yeah, for sure. So it starts with my good friend John Schaefer, who's the other director on the film. And John and I'm going to name drop one more project. We had worked together to develop Superbook for CBN. And so that was in between VeggieTales and I guess now. I had done about 5 years of working on Superbook. And I was the co-director of the pilot episode, and also designed all the characters this reinvention of the Superbook series that was popular in the 80s, early 80s. And so we were bringing it back for CBN, and John worked for CBN and he was the producer. And so he he was trying to find Christian animators, and that was his mandate, from Pat Robertson. It was, I want them to be Christian animators to help develop this. And he was like, I'm never going to find that in Hollywood. And so through prayer and a mutual friend, he did find us. I was in Franklin, Tennessee, and I had a partner, Rob Corley, who had come from Disney also. And we had a small company together. And that was how I first got to know John, they found us. We ended up making a deal, and we were going to contract to develop this show for CBN, and we did, and stayed with it through the pilot. Then I moved on and went to abcmouse.com, and then later I've been also name drop one more project, which is a Christian show that's just coming out now by Mike Naraki, my good friend who is Larry the Cucumber in VeggieTales. Mike has created a new show called Dead Sea Squirrels. And the Dead Sea Squirrels project,
that's awesome.
I helped develop that with him. And so that's another project that is on Minnow right now, if you guys know what that is. Yeah. And so now back to the story. He had left CBN and had been called to work with a man named Matt McPherson, and that he was a donor to CBN and a Superbook back in the day, and that's how they had kind of created a relationship. But Matt had a new company. It's a nonprofit, was called the Salvation Poem Foundation, and so he wanted to start doing curriculum, like biblical animated curriculum, and so brought in John to do that. And within a very short amount of time, I'm going to say the first 6 months or so of John being there, Matt came to him and said, it's been on my heart since the 90s to make a film about the story of Jesus. Wow. And now that you're here and you are a filmmaker, he was the producer of Superbook, I feel like God's telling me that it should be animated now and do it with you. And so, I mean, so there's a year or so go by, they start developing with different studios, and not everything goes perfectly, but they start kind of getting on track and stuff. But then he starts realizing how much work is involved. He's having all day meetings and, all that. And that's why there's two directors on an animated film, usually at Disney and Pixar, because there's just so many people you have to meet with, like in live action, you shoot, a scene, and it's done for as long as it takes to shoot, right? Like there's some setup before with lights and all that, obviously, and there's rehearsals, and then you shoot it, and okay, but it's pretty much done. Now you're gonna color correct it and do post-production, cut it in the movie. Well, with us, imagine doing that same scene, but dissecting it into 100 different pieces, and frame by frame, designing every lamp, every background, painting those things. Now the characters, okay, which characters are in that shot? And like it's like you've just spread that whole process out over months with lots of different people involved, because that's what it takes to do an animated film. And AI has not made it easier, by the way.
Oh, you just write a prompt now, right?
But it has told investors that you could do. They're probably telling you it's easier, even though it's not.
Yes, they are. And it will happen. I'm not poo-pooing the future and technology too much, but I will say it's just not there yet.
Well.
So long story short, he brings me on after doing an animation test. He hired my company, Pencilish Animation Studios, to do an animation test for the film, and we did that. And it was to kind of prove out, would it look good in 2D? Do these character designs work? And with that came a lot of questions. My producer, Pam Darley, came on and became a producer on the film also. And that's when they decided we had a ton of questions. We're like, well, what are you going to do for this? And who's going to animate it? And, what studio are you going to hire? All these questions they hadn't really thought about. And they were like, oh, we need help, And so basically we were the 2D animation dinosaurs that they really need on the production. And so we were able to come in and help, because nobody involved, even John, had ever done a 2D animated film. And I skipped that, but that was also another mandate from Matt, who paid for the whole thing out of his own pocket. He wanted it 2D. He said, I think that's a classic hand drawn feel.
Yeah.
I miss it from the 90s when my kids were young. And I think he's so right. I mean, obviously, I love 2D. That's been my whole career.
Yep.
But man, he's right. There's a lot of nostalgia for 2D films right now.
Yeah.
So, okay. So both Jeremy and I are dads. I got 4 kids. He's got 3 kids. And all young kids, love to draw. What kind of tips would you give dads, even with their kids, on like kind of fostering drawing and stuff? And I know in the big picture, the tech world is changing and all that, but I just mean like there's certain things that are good to do just in and of themselves, and so it feels like drawing is like a great kind of art. So what advice would you give us as dads to kind of foster drawing in our kids?
Well, I mean, you just said it right there, foster it. And so it's the support, honestly, that a lot of artists, and I'm just going to say creatives right now, writers, musicians, you name it. We don't see it in the high schools anymore. They're taking art and music out of a lot of the curriculum. And so those kids that find it very early on and enjoy it, usually they kind of excel at it. And that's what those pats on the back is what keeps driving them forward, especially at first. They'll learn the torment of art later. But it really starts with the parents. I mean, if they're not like, oh, that's dumb, you get back to your homework, because that's really how you're going to make it in this world, because so many of us were brought up that way that, oh, no, that's not important. Being a doctor, being a dentist, whatever it is, something more practical is the way to go. And I would just encourage people, parents especially, to just, encourage it because it's a good release at the very least. It's imagination is a wonderful thing, especially when you're young and everybody has it. It's just then they kind of close the door to it. And with technology and what we're seeing on the internet nowadays, man, it's so important to let those kids stay young longer. And part of that is embracing imagination and just being able to sit there. It's just like reading, sitting there and drawing is just as edifying to their souls, And so anything you can do to encourage. I will say this, it's about high school time, around that time of growth, freshman to say sophomore, junior year, that's when the rubber meets the road for every artist is like, okay, am I going to pursue this into college and stuff? Hopefully not senior year. That's getting a little bit late, as we all know. But around, I'd say the junior year or third, fourth year, somewhere in there, the parents and the kids need to start going, okay, you're still drawing. If they're still drawing at that point, that's already one flag that says, oh, they're serious, because most kids will drop off, about whatever, we'll say 6 to 8 years old in drawing, maybe even younger. So if they're still drawing fairly regularly in high school, I mean, I hate to say it, but dad, mom, you have an artist.
That's awesome.
And that's a good thing, I think. But, that's where you have to assess how into it are they, because if they just, and you'll still have some, especially girls, I will say, tend to be a little bit more cerebral, the readers, but also the artists, because the boys are into video games nowadays and all that. They want, heavy stimulus all the time. And so I do see it a lot. Most of our students, I teach at the college level, and most of our students are female. It's like 70 to 80% in the animation program is female nowadays. It didn't used to be that way. But I think it's okay. And what I always say is like, well, back when I was going into art school, it was, and especially animation, it was because we were immature guys, right? And we were nerds, basically. And that was before it was cool to be a nerd. And now that it's kind of cool to be a nerd, we're seeing the girls kind of come into, and I also blame Ariel too. There was that princess thing that happened, during the 90s that ignited a lot of, females to get into animation.
So okay. So let's say, all my kids like to draw. Yeah. As a dad who has no understanding of drawing at all, besides enjoying animated movies, which I love, I do love animated movies. What like you got a blank sheet. What do you recommend? Do we get books from the library? I mean, one of the most popular things on YouTube is watching YouTube videos of people drawing. But is there like what do you kind of what advice could you give us on a blank sheet that they could kind of do as just kind of like a fun exercise that kind of challenges them a little more to grow in that skill? Draw humans.
Yeah, good news. I have lots of thoughts on this.
Okay, good. We want to hear it. We like it.
Art instruction books. And so I feel strongly that all kids start as artists, and they start by copying, honestly. Well, actually, if I back it up even earlier, they don't start by copying because they can't reach that level of whatever picture they're looking at, even if it's like Snoopy and they're trying to copy Snoopy. They can't reach that level, so they just kind of do it out of their imagination when they're very young, and it's stick figures and things like that. But they'll progress into a part, especially now the internet. It's very popular to kind of do photorealistic renderings and copy pictures. But that is a phase. And I always tell people, like, that's fine because it is just good training to kind of look at a subject, be it real or a photo, and copy it and get as close as you can, because what you're doing there, that's part of training. You're sizing the distance between the chin and the shirt, or the arm and the cheek. That you're judging, and you're trying to get also size and proportions and things like that. And so if you can get as close as you can, to that picture, it's when I see people in high school where they're still doing that kind of photo copying and rendering. That's when I start raising a sort of a red flag to the parents or whatever, and saying they should be moving out of that. They should be, because that's a crushing moment. You get so good at copying something and you're getting a lot of pats on the backs from your friends and your family. There's a moment you have to now close the book and start drawing again from your imagination, like you did when you were a kid. But now you have this perfectionist thing in your head. I'm a perfectionist when I'm doing all the rendering, but now you have to think differently and kind of look at that things, maybe even do it like figure drawing, like life drawing at a coffee shop or something. You're drawing other people. That still counts, even though you're looking at something. But that's great training at that point. But you're going to see that your drawing level looks like it jumps down all of a sudden, and that will destroy a lot of young kids. I almost left drawing altogether in high school for that reason. I was like, I got to start doing my own comic strips and my own, because I was copying the Peanuts for so long, and Garfield and things like that. And then I started creating my own characters and things like that, but they looked bad. They didn't look like the professional stuff I was doing a minute ago when I was copying. And so it is a challenge, and there's phases to art like that. I believe in that strongly. Just encouraging through those days, but also kind of maybe if you're a savvy parent, you could start saying at a certain point, you know what, have you tried just starting with a blank piece of paper and just drawing that lamp over there? And, that's a really good exercise no matter what age you're at.
I think that's really fascinating. So both of our sets of kids are in the toddler stage. But I like that idea of even maybe it's worthwhile for them to start copying, Peanuts or I know my kids love reading Calvin and Hobbes or Tintin, or anything like that. And maybe that's a good way to just kind of learn the skill. It's interesting because my oldest son is 10, and he has a very distinctive style that's kind of cool, and he just came up with it himself. It's like these animal creatures that he does, but the animals have really big heads. Like oversized heads. And at first it was like a little odd, but now it's kind of become this little cool thing to it. But
Let's see.
I like the idea of maybe it's worthwhile to, in the first stage, if I'm hearing you right, you can kick back if I'm wrong on it, is kind of like, hey, have them copy these comic books just to be able to learn the discipline and art of what great works look like. And then later on, they can develop their own distinctive style in it.
Yeah, and there's a level of getting some success from that, right? Of like, oh, okay, because that is a little bit more of a obtainable thing, especially if they pick not a superhero comic, but like a simpler comic strip like the Peanuts. They'll find that thing that they think they can conquer. Okay, I think I can draw Snoopy or Charlie Brown or whatever. And they'll probably do it pretty close, and they'll get a little bit better at it. And maybe then they work up to, say, a Captain America or like a harder, anatomy involved. and then try and copy that. So that, yeah, there's nothing wrong with that for a phase. I do think it's more like middle school personally, that phase is kind of the most popular time to do it, but also that they shouldn't stay in it for so long. And I think that's what we're not seeing is because art instruction is going away in high school level, or it's really downplayed, or people are moving on to do sports or whatever. You're just not seeing a commitment at that high school. Those people that commit at high school and they break out of just tracing and shading and rendering and doing more inventive drawings, meaning like you're trying to tell a story, right? Like, okay, now, and that's something that a parent can do is like, I want to see you draw somebody in an ice cream shop and their ice cream fell on the ground and they're freaking out, right? To do that in one drawing, that's got multiple levels of challenges to it. And that's high school level. Like they should be able to start being able to do that, and not, because you can't copy that. They're not going to find that. Maybe on Google nowadays they could, but in general, you're making up a situation and you're also trying to tell a story with that drawing. And that is the next level. That is certainly where it can get to be where, oh, you might be able to pay the bills with this ability.
I think the thing is that like there are kind of different paths, and it could be that, they go off to be artists, but there's also just a deep value in just understanding art, and it's like one of the great human things. I know AI can do a lot of stuff too, but it's one of the great, like, I don't know, great things about being human, and it almost feels like a connection to the divine through that creativity. And it is interesting. I wonder, like, I have no understanding or research on the art side, but I know that there's a lot of research that, like, a lot of times great engineers are also great at music. There's kind of like a connection between music and like high level engineers. And so I wonder if there's like, it'd be interesting to know if there's like even a connection with that understanding of art, like spatial reasoning, and maybe it makes them good at other things, like marketing or or like, so like it could be like becoming artists, but it could also like just be, I feel like the beauty in the way God created the world is like things are connected. And they might be connected in different ways than like the other day I learned, which you probably all knew, that if you brush your teeth, it actually reduces your chances of having a heart attack. And it's like you think of like the most random connection that the amount of plaque you have on your teeth is equated to a heart attack. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And that's a weird medical example, but I feel like there are all sorts of God connections everywhere where hey, a great math engineer and music, you know what I mean? Or like maybe there's a great connection to, so I feel like all of these things are deeply worth like kind of learning. And we're in this process of debating it a lot because we have a lot of, we got our 4 kids or whatever, and they go from 10 to 4. And so they're in that toddler stage. And so really we've come to the approach of like, hey, we want them to touch a lot of different things. We want them to have a lot of different experiences in there to make the connections and kind of figure out what's next. I had a question is, so you said you got married and you lived all over. Did you end up having children along the way in that process too?
I'm a girl dad. I have 4 daughters. They're all grown now, but yeah, I was during those 90s when I was at Disney, that was when we were having our family too. And so each of the kids have their own film that we didn't name them after. I'm not saying that, but it was the film that they were born during, and so it kind of became their film.
That's awesome. Did any of them end up following you in this career path, or did they end up going to doing different things?
So yes, kind of. Not to the degree of being an animator or something like that, but both of my older daughters, and those were the ones that grew up during when I was still at Disney. And have a better recollection because the younger 2 are twins, and they were growing up more when I was at VeggieTales, and so they have some memories of that, but had missed the Disney years completely. But the older 2, my oldest Lexi went to art school or went to a college and took art and became an art major, which was a shock. It kind of came out of nowhere in her high school year. Now, she didn't really use it and all that. The degree did help, get her jobs and things like that. And they were it was in marketing. So kind of related, creative kind of a job. and she's done very well. And then my middle daughter, Ansley, she is part of my animation studio. She's doing non-artistic stuff. She's doing more of the HR and the, kind of more human resources, but also like a lot of our communication she was a communication major. So she does our newsletter and things like that.
That's awesome. What a cool thing. Well, that's awesome. Did you?
Well, I was going to ask, so when you're at Disney and you're kind of seeing, this is a little more broad about entertainment industry as a whole, you're watching Disney starting to kind of slip away and kind of fall down a certain path. Have you seen a complete shift in the way that like faith films and faith entertainment's kind of being accepted nowadays? I mean, Movieguide's been working on that for decades. You've been working in this space. How have you seen the landscape change more recently?
More recently, I mean, I think we can all kind of see there's been some obvious rerouting, I guess, at Disney in the last really recent couple years, in that Elio is a movie that came out more recently from Disney, and it had a character that was going to be their first queer character. This news just came out later. After the movie actually came out, it was kind of got leaked out. And they had obviously changed that for knowing, because there was such, over the last few years, such this feeling of like, oh, they're doing woke films, and a lot of their audience was turning away from that content, and they were having flops. So it was all showing up. I mean, this is speaking to the movie guide very well, I think. But, they were losing money. And so they were like, oh, I guess this isn't what the audience wants. We were trying to sort of like, they had a mandate, literally, or they were at least very willing, more than willing, to pursue this new kind of family, and I think we saw that the beginning of that was, I feel like when Disney had, what was that channel they had? ABC Family?
Yes, that's right. Yeah. And then they changed it to Freeform.
It became the Family Channel, and they had bought that from CBN. Actually, that used to be CBN's channel or network, and they bought it off them and called it, I think at first, ABC Family or Family Channel. And their motto was defining a new kind of family, right? Like I remember that, and that meant that they could bring in like, oh, my mom I have two moms, I have two dads. It was sort of opening up that, oh, there's more than just the average family. Families look like all kind of different colors and genders, and and so that, I think, was the beginning of that, and that was like late 90s, 2000s. It was one of the reasons I left Disney, whether I knew it or not at the time. But that was that they were starting to go down that road, right? And so, they kept going. And only more recently, because of loss of money, are they really turning around and going, okay, there is a line that parents don't want us teaching their kids who they are. And they found that line. And I'm not saying they're always going to stick to that line, but I think we've seen more recent examples where they were like, okay, Lightyear didn't make any money. We had, two women kiss, and okay. And there's been some people, even Snoop Dogg just recently, you probably read it, was commenting on that movie and that scene and saying how he felt like he didn't want his grandkids to see it. Which is crazy, but yeah, it's a good story.
Do you feel like because of kind of the woke turn of Disney, which maybe they're turning back or whatever, is do you think that kind of leaves that opportunity for movies like Light of the World? Because it is interesting that the faith, it feels like the faith independent films for so long have kind of been a little bit more of these like adult like dramas, typically like someone's going through cancer or something, and like God provides or whatever and stuff, and we're like, obviously those need to be made and those touch people too, but like one of the things that we've talked about a lot and deeply remiss about is like, hey, more awesome, on fire kids godly content. Do you know what I mean? Because it's like, and really like the family went to Disney for so long, but now they're in search of that home. And so it feels like Light of the World is kind of actually a prime moment in time where it's like, hey, look, like here's an alternative to that. And so I would ask you in that 3 questions. One is the first, if you think there's an opportunity now because of that. Number 2 is what age range do you think really is suited toward Light of the World? And then number 3 is, let's say Light of the World kills it, which we're hoping it will. Does that mean you guys are now going to go off to make more of these kind of like yearly or regular, Christian animated content?
Yeah, I think at least why we haven't seen the animated, kid stuff really since VeggieTales. VeggieTales was the one that came up, surprised everybody, became this overnight sensation over 10 years, but and became this huge thing. And every Comic Con I go to, sometimes I guest at Comic Cons and things like that. I'll talk about the Disney stuff because I think that's what everybody wants to hear. But as soon as I mention VeggieTales, people get really excited. It's amazing, the nostalgia for it too. And so, I think that for whatever reason, we couldn't crack that, trying to get the next VeggieTales for kids. And I think because everybody wants to do it cheap. And the hardest thing you can do cheap is animation. And so I honestly blame the financiers, whoever's basically putting money into stuff, entertainment for families and for Christians especially. They've been doing the low-hanging fruit. They've been doing live-action dramas because they're inexpensive. We get one semi-star to be in it. We could probably do it for, 3 to 5 million, like tops, or maybe we'll do 2 or 3 movies for 3 to 5 million. But like that's the price ranges they're looking at, and it's hard to do a halfway decent animated film for under 20 million, honestly. You look at the Disney films, they're all 200 million or 150 million, you know what I mean? So you say a $20 million film in Hollywood, or animated film, let's be clear, that's really, really low budget, right? Like that was our budget for Light of the World, was $20 million. And so I'm really proud of how good it looks. And then the other side of that is there's not a lot of people like me out there. There's not enough animation believers that are going, I'm going to commit to making Christian content. And I must admit, I don't do it 100% of the time. Every once in a while, I'll do something for Disney. I do other things. But in general, that's been my path since I left Disney, has been trying to seek out Christian content. It's so few and far between. And honestly, that's not because of me. Like I said, it's the people putting the money in. They're thinking way too small. They're thinking, oh, I want to get return on this, so I'm going to put in the very least amount of money, and therefore animation's out. I don't have the budget for that. It's understandable, but it's unfortunate. And so I would say that's the biggest reason we're not seeing more things like Light of the World, because we need brave, financiers that are going to put that money in and give it to the right people, honestly. You can't, animation is so specific. You can't just give that money to anybody and get a good result. You have to find the right people. And that's hard too. So I'm not trying to remember your second question.
The second question is, what age range would you say, hey, come to this movie? Yeah. As a parent, do you say, bring your 6-year-old to it, bring your 10-year-old to it? Where would you say?
Yeah, I mean, 10 is definitely a good number. I would say 8. It's when you get to the very young, 4-ish or 4 to 6. There's going to be some that are going to have difficulty with the end of the movie, because as we all know, he gets crucified, and so we obviously don't show all the blood and all that. There's actually only one drip of blood that we show. But you do see him in a very graphic way. He's all scraped up and things. We do it with color and stuff that it's not like bleeding, but we do it in kind of a fun, not fun, but graphic way. And so I do, but you hear him screaming and stuff like that. And so it's emotional. And that's the thing, is the second half of our film, it gets very emotional. Adults are crying in this movie. And I've seen it now 4 or 5 screenings. And but you should. I mean, if a kid walks out of this movie and doesn't have questions about Jesus, about the Bible, about did this really happen? Did this really happen? I'm going to be shocked. I'm going to say, well, we didn't do our job right because I'm hearing it constantly from adults to kids where they're going, they just see the movie and they're like, and really young kids, as you know, they'll just ask questions during the movie and they start during the movie just asking these questions. But man, they're good questions. They're the kind of questions that dads, but parents in general, are going to want to answer. And so this is an amazing film to show to, because it's so accessible because of animation. I think it's going to change the lives of not just kids, but adults too. Because I think this is the kind of thing you can bring a friend of yours, a college friend, whatever, like an adult, and say, hey, let's go watch this movie. It looks like it's really good animation, and just leave it at that. But what they're going to see is a very true and emotional and funny at times the story of the life of Jesus, told through the eyes of a young John the Apostle, who in our film, we made 13. So it's a coming of age story about John trying to find a Messiah because he's been hearing about it in his culture for hundreds of years, and people have started to give up. They don't believe he's coming. And so John does believe, but he does it kind of in selfish motivation. He needs that warrior king that's going to defeat the Romans because they're being oppressed, and he wants to help try and save his family from taxation and things like that. And so he's seeking him for that reason. But it really is a wonderful story. The way we're telling it through the young John's eyes, and he is the character in the Bible. I don't want to say character, but he's the person in the Bible that is there through all the major events with Jesus, all the way to the crucifixion. He's one of the few apostles that was there. And so he's the perfect character to tell this story through. And because also, in the Bible, it says Jesus said that John was his favorite. And John liked to tell everybody that. So we got, there's already a personality there, and they already have a friendship. And so we just went with that in a really fun way. So I do think it's for everybody. I do think the parents don't just drop them off. You need to be there with them, because there's going to be a lot of great questions that are going to come up. But really young kids, obviously, it's sort of like Lion King. I mean, obviously Lion King, he dies, Simba's dad dies. I mean, it can be pretty emotional too. This might be that level, I'm guessing.
Okay. That's good.
Cool.
Okay, well, I think we're actually coming to our time of conclusion, but what advice would you give to young parents? What's one advice would you give to young dads? You've told us kind of a little bit about your career and how you actually took your family all over the country. You've kind of told us a little bit about how you followed God's call away from kind of a big company to doing a small company and then doing your own company, like an independent company and then your own company. And then, you've talked about this movie, and I thought maybe what could you share with dads like ourselves that you'd kind of recommend? What one piece of advice would you say, hey, I wish I knew that, 20 years ago or whatever on that?
There's so many things. I'm old enough that I've learned a few things, but the one I would say this, and maybe this is God giving me this one because I don't know where it came from, but I feel like as adults, we don't show our kids when we fail. We try and hide it. And so I had a very successful career, but there were definitely things that I failed at. And them just seeing, and then the flip side of that, them hearing why you've made a hard decision like mine to leave Disney back when it was my dream to work there. And I ended up leaving. Like, I know for my oldest daughter, especially, who was old enough to hear a little bit about that and remember me doing that was a profound moment for her. She got it. She knew how much Dad loved his job at Disney and would work there long hours if I needed to be. And I did. I would stay there all night sometimes because I had to get a scene done. And so there was a really struggle and hardship there too, where I didn't see the family as much, which was partially one of the reasons I left too. But honestly, it's them seeing both your successes and your failures, but especially the decision making that goes into both of those things, I think it's so important. We shouldn't be shielding our kids from that, because then they're not ready to make those decisions. They didn't see it in their parents. So I want my kids to take risks for God. And I'm glad that they saw that I did. And then literally we were brokenhearted. I left my dream job. We moved to Chicago, to a cold area from Orlando. And 2.5 years later, I get laid off. Like the day we were going to the Jonah premiere, the night before we'd gone to the Jonah premiere, and it was on a Thursday. Friday morning, we came in and they laid off almost everybody.
Wow.
Our computers weren't working. It was just like any corporate experience you've ever had. I'd never been laid off in my life. I'd left Disney on my own accord, and I had to come home and tell my kids that Dad got laid off from this thing that he felt like God told him to go do. And that was a learning moment for them. And for me, honestly, my wife and I, we didn't get it for a long time. We didn't know, like, why did that happen? Why God? Why did you have that happen to us? And, because now we were in real fear. Like, what's next? How are we going to support our family? And I did end up going back. That was why I went back to Disney for a brief time to do Brother Bear, because they needed help. It was low hanging fruit. They just, okay, come on back. But it wasn't a long-term situation. I still needed to find what was next for me. And they saw me leave Florida after that too, and moved to a little town called Franklin, Tennessee. And that was another risk that I took, because it was just early internet. So I felt like, I can have clients all over the world through the internet. But this was like 2003. People weren't really doing that. But I said, no, we're going to, I feel like God will take care of us. We're going to just live where we want to live. And I'm going to do freelance. I'm going to work through this new thing called the internet. And it worked out. Because I do feel like, but they saw all that. They saw that, and my wife's a really hard worker. She's gotten a doctorate degree and everything. She's all on the education side of things. And they saw her at 50, go and get her doctorate degree, and how hard it was. They saw her crying at night sometimes because it was so hard and she wasn't sure she could do it. We can't shield our kids from that. We need to, you kids go upstairs, we're gonna have to work something out. Sometimes it's good for them to see that.
Wow. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us for this time. We've had a great time, and we look forward to everyone seeing your movie. Tell us the date of its release.
Well, tickets are on sale now, and that's important to know. But yeah, it comes out September 5th weekend. That whole weekend, I just want to make a plea for all of you guys out there that have said, we need Hollywood to make Christian content. We need Hollywood to make family films. I don't like the way Disney's going and all that. This is that movie. Congratulations. We listened. We made that movie. Now, if you don't support it opening weekend, this was back to your third question, by the way, that I never answered. We won't be able to make another movie. So honestly, the answer to your question was, are we going to do another one? What's next? All that. It really depends on this film. We need the U.S. and Canada, parts of Canada, to come out September 5th weekend and really just see this movie. You won't regret it. You're going to enjoy it, I promise. I'm so happy with how this movie came out. I compare it to my Lion King, right? Like, I worked on Lion King. I know what I put into that. We put that much into this. But the story is the greatest story ever told. And God gave us a way into it that I think is going to really communicate to kids. So, September 5th.
Amazing. Awesome. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.